Welcome to the Fusionary Health podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta, and I have an incredible guest in store for you today, Meryl Brandwine. Hi, Meryl. How are you?
Hi, Shivani. I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. So, I've already had you on my podcast in the past. So, if you guys want the deep dive on Meryl, her background, her story on cancer, check out that episode. It was pretty early on in this podcast, so
Mhm.
probably between episode like 20 and 40, somewhere in there. And we dove into health and what you do. So, I'm going to share your bio real quick so people understand a little more about you. Meryl offers clients an alternative approach to getting healthy, and her tenacity and dedication has earned her the nickname the Rebel Nutritionist. She rejects a one size fits all approach to nutrition and wellness, and she digs deep into the root cause of your symptoms to help you heal. For over 20 years, the Brandwine Institute has offered clients a better way to restore health and wellness. And she looks at the whole person, including lifestyle, behavioral factors, and core issues. Meryl can help you restore your health and provide a nutritional plan that is truly balanced. So, Meryl, I have loved getting to know you over time. I've visited your office location that was beautiful. I know that you have helped so many clients get better. And I love how you take such a scientific, data driven approach to what you do. So, will you share a little bit about your background and what brought you to do this work? And then today, everyone, we're going to dive into my 3x4 DNA test. I have been on quite a journey with functional medicine, doing so much testing over the last couple of years. There's always more testing that I need to do to understand myself even better. But this 3x4 test to me was fascinating. It was so detailed about different aspects of my own body that I had an inkling were true, but this gave me that data that I could really operationalize. So I can't wait for Meryl to dive into my DNA test just to give you an example of the level of understanding you could have of your own DNA testing.
Awesome. Yes. Where did you want me to start? Tell everybody what I do.
Yes.
How I got there. Well, like you said, right, my original journey, I mean, my cancer journey started over 20 years ago, and that's what prompted me into this world of functional medicine. And since then, like you, I'm a lover of learning. You never stop learning, and so as functional medicine has gained traction, as technology and science, right? We learn more about the body every year, every day, I feel like. And so adopting those kinds of practices and being able to move forward in a way that is, again, that lifelong learning of just absorbing as much as we can, right? So being certified in functional medicine, I've got a double certification in genomic nutrition. Not a lot of people are doing that. And I think that definitely sets us apart with the work that I do and really understanding what is someone's unique blueprint. Because again, right, it's not one size fits all. We're never going to get where we want to be with our health, our well-being, our longevity if we're going to use that one size fits all approach. So using the DNA testing, using the nutrient testing. I've recently also been certified in immune certification for dietitians, nutritionists. So understanding the immune system, right, goes back to root cause. Everything starts with the immune system, and that's where inflammation starts and all that. So being able to peel away those layers for people and really diagnostically look at what's going on in a way. I always say it's like I'm running quarterback. And we hear often, so many times, like you've said, like so many people that I hear about, I've been to so many different practitioners. I've been to this one, I've been to that one. And I think when people finally get to us, they realize, oh, you're putting all these pieces together like no one has before. You're really looking at this in a way that's organizing my health very differently. It's not just saying, here's your diagnosis and let me give you a supplement, right? That's no different than saying, here's a diagnosis and let me give you a medication.
Sure.
We don't want to band-aid symptoms, right? We don't want to band-aid if you've got fatigue, if you've got bloating, if you've got discomfort, if you've got brain fog, whatever it is. We don't want to band-aid it and just make the symptom go away. We want to get to the root of what's causing this in the first place.
True.
And so when we get the DNA testing, it really goes to, wow, what is at the core of what predisposes you to certain things, and how does that trigger health conditions down the road?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because there's so much controversy around DNA testing. Like there's big DNA companies out there that
Yeah.
are potentially selling our data, which is scary. So I had
Well,
never
they're
done
not potentially, they're selling it.
so I had never done my DNA testing. And then I met the founder of 3 by 4 at one of the A4M conferences, and
Yeah.
she is the real deal. Like,
Yael is amazing.
and I
Yael
was like,
is
oh,
amazing.
this is
Yeah.
going to be so interesting over time
Yeah.
to see how you support practitioners to support us as the client and patient in addressing our health from a completely different level of comprehension. Because, for example, like you said, we go to a lot of practitioners. I've been to many practitioners, got blood work, did stool tests, did food intolerance testing, like testing. It's been great, learned a lot, but it's almost like you're constantly throwing more supplements and more solutions at something, not really seeing where the leaks are. And that's what I found interesting about this test. I was like, whoa, this is really specific. It's telling me actually, yes, I do have the strength to lift heavy and the endurance to do HIIT workouts and things, because I wasn't sure. I was like, well, I love it. Does that mean it's good for me?
Right.
And so to have clarity on that, I think is huge, because then we have this completely different self-understanding, but also we're
Mhm.
not wasting time, wasting money, wasting effort. I find in women's health, it's like we're running this marathon and it never ends. And so to me, it was interesting that in the 3 by 4 you had a whole different data set to approach health with.
Right. Well, and I think that's the key, like you said, it's approaching health. And I think, like, in this market, in the market of women's health, we are so misled because good marketing, right? These companies that pay for the ads and the views and all that kind of stuff, it's not always, it's oftentimes it's more smoke and mirrors than it is actual valid clinical, clinically driven results. And so we become very misled about, with like the dangling carrot in front of our face, like, oh, chase this, oh, chase that.
Right.
And half the time we're chasing the wrong things,
True.
and it's not impacting our health. We're doing a lot to try and change, especially in the world of, anti-aging, right? We're trying to change the outside, but we know that unless the inside's really healthy and balanced, the outside will never, the outside is a reflection of what's going on inside. So you can do all the stuff from the outside, but if the inside is not really, really healthy and supported, doesn't matter what you do.
Correct. So when it comes to the 3 by 4, let's dive into my test, because I'm so curious how it will illuminate to the listener what's possible for them.
Right.
Because the more I understand my health, the easier it is for me, has been for years now, to kind of self-navigate. Like whenever I do an Ayurveda consultations with someone, I'm like, listen, I've been practicing Ayurveda for 20 years. It's now an intuitive
Yes.
motion of what I do. And when
Right.
I hear very modern day thought processes around you need 120 grams of protein every day forever, I will try different ideas. I try them all the time, but my body will have this like voice come screaming out of it like, really,
Yep.
really, this is what you're going to do to yourself right now? This goes against everything Ayurvedic. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And then I have to refine my balance and my wholeness with it.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I think oftentimes, what the genetic test allows us to do is really hone in on that piece that is part intuition,
Yeah.
and then part just what makes us individually unique, and understanding how to weave the two into play for yourself. But and trying to also um rebuttal on all of the things that are coming in from, like, and we don't even know if it's good science, right? We don't There's really no good data. I mean, I did a whole podcast on protein, and
Mm,
to be honest, and I did a lot of research on it, and I did some, a lot of deep digging into it, and there was really no great clearly statistical or research driven number or place that we could find clear data on how much protein we really need.
mm,
Everything was driven, from the 1930s, and even then it wasn't so scientific. Some of it was arbitrary. A lot of it was arbitrary based on just what observationally was going on. So I feel like a lot of what we're hearing out there in regards to protein isn't even coming from factual driven researched places.
Wow.
And so I always say the pendulum, I told you before, before we went on, the pendulum is swinging very high over on the side of protein.
Sure.
At some point, that pendulum is going to come back when we realize that we're eating way too much protein, especially as women.
Yeah.
The fact that you told me you're consuming 120 grams of protein is insanity.
It's
Insanity.
hard. I mean,
And
it's
not,
hard.
well, because it's not supposed to be. You're
No.
not supposed to be consuming 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. That is so high. And what's happening is people, and sometimes people start this and they're like, oh, I've lost weight. I'm like, yeah, you've lost weight because you've shifted some things, but in the long run you're going to end up like, like you're saying, be challenged for the weight loss because your insides, right, your liver and some of your other organs are just padded with so much fat from that protein that it becomes a problem. And I know this is not a protein conversation, but I
Sure.
feel like it is very it's a hot topic at the moment, right? It is very timely in that there's so many people and so many women are coming to me and they're like, I don't feel well eating so much protein. I'm like, you're not supposed to be eating so much protein,
Yeah.
right? Protein is primarily structural. You need it for the structure part of your body, but to feed muscle, you need glucose. You need real glucose from fruits and vegetables because that's what feeds the liver and that's what feeds muscle.
Hmm.
And so we can debate this all day long because I'm sure there are people be going, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I'm telling you, I'm not. I've been doing nutritional biochemistry for long enough to know when we're onto something and when something makes sense and when it doesn't. And so, look, yeah, you can try it, but I always say we're our own best experiments. You try it on yourself and see what works. But
Right.
but ultimately, in the long run, this level of protein is just not it's not sustainable long term, nor is it beneficial long term. So
Yeah.
do
No,
you
I appreciate that. I think it's good to talk about it, you know?
yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people it's the elephant in the room. Everybody's just following along. Yeah, yeah, oh, that sounds good, I need to do this. And it makes sense from an intuitive perspective. You think, okay, well, I'm working out more, I need more protein, but there's that threshold of like, where it's not, it's that cost benefit ratio kind of thing.
Right.
At a certain point, you do not need more. More is not always better. It's what else am I missing in the diet that needs to augment that and help. So,
True.
um, and we need to be getting in the gym, with which most women are not doing enough of anyway. So,
True.
doing that resistance work.
Yeah.
So,
And in Ayurveda, we always like no matter what plan I try, I'm always like, Ayurveda said a very balanced approach.
yes,
Fresh fruit and vegetables. The sattvic diet that I teach is very much holistic, nutrient density, seasonality, all these things. So as much as I like to try new ideas, my intuition will scream from the inside and say, you know what? You can try this for a season, but this is not going to be the long term plan. This doesn't work for you. And so that's why I'm definitely going to listen to your podcast on protein. So guys, check out the Rebel Nutritionist. That's her podcast and the protein episode because I think it is important that what happens is we do have these big swings. I love that you called it swings. We have these swings, Atkins, South Beach. Everyone's looking for the magic pill. Everyone's
yep,
now doing GLP-1s. Like, what's the magic pill? I just want the magic pill. And every time I sit down with a client, I'm like, listen, unfortunately, there's no actual magic pill. There's doing the work for your body, for your dosha, your constitution, your makeup. And so in ancient Ayurveda, we have a lot of data on how to live. And then I love that in modern day times, we can increase that knowledge, self knowledge, by using tests like these. And the
right.
DNA test is one example of a test. I'm sure you have a whole group of tests that you use on people to help understand and help them understand what they're intolerant to, what they're deficient in, and how they can get the support they need.
Well, absolutely. And I think the beauty is, I always say, you want to do the right testing at the right time for the right reasons, right? I think a lot of practitioners fall into this, oh, just let's do, a battery of tests. And you can only mitigate and deal with one thing at a time. You can only address one system at a time. And I always say, if we hit the nail on the head in the right way, everything else does fall in line from that. But I think the beauty of having the DNA testing is that is like the buck stops there. This is your blueprint. This is your DNA. I mean, it doesn't get much more specific than that, you know?
Right. And it doesn't change. It's a one-time test.
Exactly. One-time test. I always say one time, unless, as we keep getting more variations of it, meaning more genes that we can sequence,
Sure.
that's the only reason, right? I mean, when we started, the test was, when we did it before even 3x4 was around, first testing that we used, it was, 50, 60 genes. Now we're up to, 3 times that.
Wow.
And so, or 4 times that. So that would be the only reason that you would redo it. But yes, this is your, the buck stops at the DNA. And then what we would look at is, how do we validate what we're seeing in the genetics? And I'll talk about that with yours. So do you want me to pull it up and share the screen?
I don't know if we can share the screen on the podcast. Let me see.
It shows it here that I can.
Go ahead. Yeah, if you can, please do.
Let me just make sure. Yes, I have
And
yours.
then I would just assume for the podcast that most people are audio and only a portion of video, but it's totally fine. Just try not to show my birthday.
Oh, wait, let's see. I want to share screen. Let's see. Oh, can I do that window? Let's see. Oh, there it is. Let's see. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yay. All right. Sorry, I'm making everybody dizzy here, just going up to the top. All right. So yeah, it doesn't have your birthday. Don't worry. So this is you, right? The personal story of you. Now, I'm not going to walk everybody through this test, but I think there's important points that I want to show here, because I think it's significant for people to understand what we're looking at. And then I can take you through sort of the nuances of how I look at the test.
Sure.
Okay.
Perfect.
So what we talk about here is impact, and everything that is done in this test, there's algorithms around how they come up with this. So when I'm walking you through this, I'm going to say, for the point of the discussion today, things that are high and very high impact are going to have the biggest impact in your health right now. It doesn't mean that things that are medium and low are not important to look at. It just means that the high and the very high are the ones that we're going to want to focus on, because those are the ones that are going to be most likely to be out of balance right now, and that we would get validation on. So that's what we look at. But again, medium and low are still important to pay attention to. Okay. So the test will come up with the top 3 pathways, like your top 3 pathways, right? For you, bone health is a high impact, methylation is a high impact, and oxidative stress. And most people are like, wait a minute, what are these terms? I don't understand this. Like, this is all blah, 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 Like a friend of mine always says, when I talk, she hears wah, 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 right? Like that teacher, like the teacher from the Snoopy cartoons. So what we really try and do is make this relatable. I always put together sort of this genetic blueprint story. It's a genetic story. I didn't do it today because I want to take you through the test, but it really does help break things down for people in a way that is understandable, that's approachable, and that, more importantly, they can take that information and do something with it. Right? Sure. That we can implement this in a way that is going to move the needle for them. So for you, that's what we're looking at. But the other thing, and then these are the individual genes, which we're not going to get into for today's purposes, but they're important for me to look at to understand where the impacts are. What I like to look at also are these things called pathway-based results, because that shows me where am I starting with you. So let's look at the picture here, right? This is a better understanding of these cellular systems are, let's call it the top line systems, that if these are out of balance, it's going to affect everything else in your body. So if people are having symptoms, they're not going to go, oh, I have a methylation issue and my, blood sugar imbalance is a result of the methylation. People don't know that because they don't understand their bodies well enough, right? This is where understanding how to interpret. And it's not enough to have a practitioner just walk you through and say, oh, well, methylation's a problem. Let me give you a supplement for methylation. or, oxidative stress is a problem. Let me give you a supplement for oxidative stress. That's not the point.
Yeah.
Right? The point is saying, okay, we have genes in the oxidative stress bucket. We have genes in the methylation bucket. Let's validate this and see, are we seeing impacts with methylation? Right? Methylation is a very, very, very complicated biochemical process. Like I said, most people, look, it took me years to understand methylation, right? And so it's a complicated biochemical process, as is oxidative stress. But the best way to say it and explain all of this, it's like an orchestra, and you have a conductor. And so if that conductor is out of sync anywhere, of off timing, then the orchestra, whatever music they're trying to play, won't sound beautiful. And they're going to be off time. And people are going to go, wait, that doesn't sound so good. Well, this is the same thing. This pattern where it's methylation, inflammation, oxidative stress, and detox is your orchestra. And if anything here is off, then it's going to affect how the body functions. And so, what we would want to look at for you is, let's look at and validate, are we seeing issues with methylation, which includes, but not limited to, everybody thinks, oh, I have to go take methylated folate.
Right.
Yes, folic acid. Well, it's not folic acid, but it's the methylated version of folic acid. You don't want to ever be taking folic acid. Which also you want to be careful of in food. If folic acid is added to food, you want to not take, things like breads and crackers and cereals. You don't want to take folic acid. Folic acid actually competes for absorption with the methylated version, and it can cause all kinds of problems in the body. So you got to be careful with how you're supplementing your folate. But we would want to look at things like homocysteine levels, right? We would want to look at vitamin B12 and vitamin B6, and we'd want to look at iron, right? Minerals. Like, we have to look at the whole picture. It's never just saying one thing. Oxidative stress is a similar situation. It's, where are your levels of antioxidants? Oxidative stress is how the body responds to foreign invaders or to free radicals, which could be toxins in the air. It could be toxins from food. It could be bacteria. It could be all these things that want to damage our cells. And that's oxidative stress. And oxidative stress, think of like rusting, or, right, nobody wants their cells to rust. Or even better is like an apple. You take an apple, if you cut an apple, what happens to it if you leave it exposed to air?
Turns brown.
Turns brown, right?
Yep.
That browning is oxidative damage. It's things in the environment that are causing the cells to die. And so when we take antioxidants, so if you squeeze a lemon over that, or an orange, right, any citrus over that apple, what happens? It prevents the apple from getting so brown so fast. Why?
Correct.
Because vitamin C, which is in the citrus, is a very, very potent antioxidant. So you think of your antioxidants as your body's army protecting you from these free radicals that are coming in to damage those cells. Well, if we're not testing those levels of antioxidants, how do we know where you stand then? How do we know where your level of oxidative stress is, right? We can look at other things. There's something called oxidized LDLs. There's other things like myeloperoxidase and even oxidative stress markers there that we can look at, that we test to see what level of damage is going on in your DNA from that, right? So we always want to say, oh, okay, here's the information from the genes and the genetics that predisposes me to oxidative stress. But then how are we looking at it and then validating that it's actually happening? Because remember, one thing we want to be really, really careful about with these reports is that genetics just shows predisposition.
Right.
It is not diagnosing. It is not predicting. So, for people who are afraid, like, I don't want to know my DNA because I don't want to know what's going to happen.
Right.
We have way more control over our destiny than that. This is not predictive. We're not saying you're going to get cancer as a result of oxidative stress. We're saying oxidative stress left unmanaged and left untreated can produce these things, But isn't it great to know that you have the power to change that?
True. True. And also, it helps you understand why you run deficiencies all the time. Like when you talked about methylation, B12,
Yeah.
B6, iron, I'm always deficient chronically. And I'm taking B supplements, methylated B supplements, trying to push up and win at the goal. But it's so interesting when you see it here, you're like, oh, that's why that one's a struggle. Maybe we have to address it multifaceted. It has to
Right.
be approached through food and other things. Can't just win taking only the supplement. It's interesting you talk about oxidative stress. I take my turmeric supplement very religiously. When I don't, I can feel it. And so
Right.
it's interesting when you've learned what works for you and you apply it knowing the data, you have that much more of a compelling reason to be consistent, but you also understand why something works so well for you.
Well, and so to that end, and I'm not, of course, turmeric is, we know the huge benefits of turmeric, right? But if we're going to look at oxidative stress, so if you see let me just move that over a second. So if you see the screen, right, this is what I would call the gene buckets. These are the gene buckets. Now, the genes in and of themselves, you're not going to really understand like how to read this, right? But the fact that, so this GSTM1 is a glutathione based gene. All right, it's how, and glutathione is the body's most potent antioxidant that we actually make. We
Right.
make glutathione through food, right? Food that we eat and all that kind of thing. So food allows us to make glutathione. However, you have a genetic SNP, right? A single nucleotide polymorphism. You have a typo, if you will, on how your body makes glutathione here. But not only do you have it here, you have another one called GSTO2. And then you have another one called GPX1 and GSTP1. Those are all glutathione based, if you will, genes. So your body is compromised in how it makes glutathione. So you could be taking tons of turmeric, which helps with inflammation and has all of these other benefits. But if
Sure.
we're not looking specifically for you at glutathione, we will
Mm.
never manage oxidative stress in the right way. You
Now
see?
that's interesting.
Yeah. So that's why looking at the genetic piece is so important, right? And so for you, even though inflammation is a medium impact,
Mm.
you've got significant genes here for inflammation or that trigger inflammation. You know, this FOXO is a transcription factor, IL-1 is interleukins, right? Certain things in the immune system that if they get triggered, that you may be compromised in how your body responds to inflammation. So when you have all of this information, now you're knowing exactly what to do at the root to help support that,
Sure. So interesting.
right? So that's why looking at the totality of the report and not just saying, what, here, right, what this is, and understanding what this cellular piece is. And then as we get into the systems. So you had said, so before I go to mood and behavior, because we were talking about that before you popped on, does
Yeah.
that make sense to you? Do you follow me on understanding the cellular systems?
It makes sense, and there's such big systems. I mean, when you're talking about detoxification, that's a big deal. How you detox,
Yes.
how you get inflamed, and how your body responds is a big deal. So then, how do you typically guide someone when you say, "Hey, like you are not a great producer of glutathione, you're genetically not set up to make this well." Are the recommendations always food, or is it a combination of food,
Well,
lifestyle?
here's, yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, that's good.
Here's the thing. We're going to use the pillars of health. We're going to understand that everything is always interconnected. And I always, I wish I could say I coined this term, but genetics loads the gun,
Mm,
lifestyle pulls the trigger,
of course.
right? I think that's pretty impactful. And I want people to really understand genetics loads the gun. So here's the gun that's loaded, but your lifestyle and how you live your life is going to pull the trigger on that. So when people say, oh, it's my genes, it's my destiny, that's bull, because we have so much control. There's a subset of genetics, epigenetics. It's everything else but our genetics. So our mental emotional status is going to affect, right, our outlook on life, our you know are we happy? Do we have we look at the world as an optimist, glass half full or glass half empty, and those kinds of things like that will impact your genes, right? The toxins in our environment can trigger our genetics to a tipping point. The household products that we use in our everyday living, right? If we are exposed to so many toxins, the food we eat, 100%, right? We know food, the nutrients, and there's substances in food, not just vitamins and minerals and antioxidants, but these things called bioactives. Turmeric is one of the bioactives that actually talks to our DNA and flips DNA on and off.
True.
And so we have so much control over our genetic destiny. And sometimes even our genes can be impacted generationally. What
Sure.
happened to our parents and our grandparents, and even the things that they were exposed to. So there's so many other factors that do trigger our genetic predispositions that we have to look at all of it. Food is always going to be first line because food is the most influential over our genes, right? We're going to look at supplementation because in your case, Shivani, I would be willing to bet that doesn't matter how much food you eat that's going to help support your glutathione,
Yeah.
your genetics put you at a disadvantage to really make it efficiently and effectively, which is why testing is going to be so important for you.
Absolutely. And then getting the recommendations on what to take. Like I've taken glutathione in different ways. When I had surgery a few years ago,
Yeah,
I took a liquid pump form that came refrigerated. And
right.
then recently, when I was at one of the A4M conferences, I met a gentleman who made a new topical version. So I've been
Right.
trying that. But
Yeah,
what's
I know which
interesting
one
to
you're
me,
talking about.
yeah, and I'd love to have him on the podcast because I'm so curious about like how you made it and how it works. I love understanding how and why.
Yeah,
But when it comes to this test, like it said here, very high bone health. And I do not think about my bone health. I've never broken a bone. I actually don't like dairy. So I know in my mind I'm not taking calcium. I don't want to take calcium supplements. So I'm not doing anything for my bone health. But
right.
based on what I was seeing that you pulled up here, I saw bone health and I was like, whatever, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure I'm fine. But I've
right.
never done the DEXA scan. And it
Well, and remember, so bone
was
health is here,
horrible.
right? You have a very high impact. But again, if we go back and look at, okay, well, in bone health, right? If I'm here, VDR is your vitamin D receptor genes.
Okay.
So is it that you're taking vitamin D and you are not absorbing it that well, right? Which is why
See.
we want to look at that and how you're supplementing and supporting vitamin D. The other thing that you've got here, DIO2, is actually a thyroid marker. So
Mm,
are we paying attention to thyroid? Thyroid has a huge impact in terms of bone health, right?
sure.
And when you said, we talk about calcium, but what I'm going to tell you that is not, I mean, I think it's starting to come out,
Yeah.
but silica is tremendously important when we talk about bone health,
Hmm.
right? Everybody thinks it's collagen, collagen, collagen. Collagen is less important than is silica, your vitamin K, your vitamin Ds, and things like that. So, are we also getting the right information when we're talking about the nuances of what triggers our own ability to heal and recover and deal with some of these things?
That I find interesting because had I read the test myself, I would have made an assumption on calcium and I would have
Right,
looked up all the foods that increase calcium. And if it was like not necessarily kale, but something else, I would have started incorporating that food. Like right now, I'm on a high iron plan, in my opinion. I'm eating
right,
beets consistently every week. I'm eating spinach like it's my job. I'm doing a lot of things. But when it comes to D, I am chronically D deficient. I'm
right,
trying to bump it all the time. And what's interesting is recently I had my kids tested, and both of them, their D is in the trash. They're like level
right.
19, even though
Wow.
my son is in sailing camp, soccer, like he was
Right.
toasted this summer with what I did to him. Still D deficient. I thought, oh my God, my kids have my template. This is
Yeah.
so bad. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, yeah, okay, being fascinated with my health is interesting, I've done stool tests on my kid and I've done certain blood tests every time. Everything that I find that's not great in my blood work, I see it in them, but worse.
Yeah.
So it's a very compelling reason to understand why you need to make shifts and then eventually understand. For me, I'll just preventively give them everything, but why we need to address it in our own family because it's
Right.
coming down the pipeline, like you
Yep.
said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things, as long as we're on it, right? Mood and behavior for you is a high impact. And we talked a little bit about the dopamine piece before we got on the,
Yeah.
on the podcast. But like we can look at things like MAOA, which impacts dopamine and the ability for dopamine to be detoxified through the system.
Right.
Right. So if your body, or is it detox too fast or too slow? Right. There's that whole thing. So this is why having someone who can do the interpretation of understanding the nuances of how these things literally biochemically impact your body creates the nuance for how you need to be living your life. And I don't know that everybody appreciates that so
Yeah.
much. Like, it's that really it is in the interpretation and understanding, and it's baby steps of how we do this.
Right.
But looking at the dopamine, but it's also GABA for you. This GABA gene is a big one for you. And so GABA is that feel good neurotransmitter, right? And it keeps us we feel good. So like you said, you experience joy and all that kind of stuff, and then your high highs or low lows or whatever they are. Well, how do we help you better manage this?
Right.
And so it's really, we can look at neurotransmitters, right? But you need vitamins and minerals to support neurotransmitters.
Right.
And so how do we get those? We have to get those through food. So this is why food is always so important to look at when we're doing this testing, or when we're looking to validate, because it's the deficiencies that will create, the symptoms of all of these things.
Sure. And, I had someone previously on the podcast and we talked about my DNA and he mentioned, you have the genes of a serial killer. And I was like, what? I'm such a nice person. What are you even talking about? But it was interesting if you explain to someone like me, you have the genetics of having really high highs and you drop fast. I immediately thought, wow, I do that with food.
Right.
If I eat in a restaurant and the food tastes phenomenal, sometimes I cannot stop eating. Why? Because it's just so awesome. And so I've just reprogrammed myself to know, hey, you're going out for dinner with your friends. Totally fine. Don't order like two things that you love the most. Like eat the healthy thing first. And I also have a habit now. I have a protein shake on my way to dinner because
Right.
I know that once you put something amazing in my hands, a glass of wine, anything, I'll just keep going. It's like a drug addiction, the level of like, I just want the joy. I just want the joy. And so now I've learned to really moderate with that because I'm like,
Right.
oh,
Right. And so the reason I kind of scrolled as you were talking is I was looking at appetite and satiety,
yeah,
because one of the things that we can look at is like weight management. There's a whole section in here. It's
nice.
this one. I'll just show you. Let me just pull this up so I'm not like, so this area here, whoops, that's nutrients. This one here, energy overview, is all how your body holds on to weight and resistance in losing weight and understanding. Here's, metabolism and your response to exercise. And then your ability, how genetically are you programmed for weight gain and weight loss resistance, right? So for you, it's actually a medium impact.
Yeah.
Metabolically and your exercise response, you really have good genes. So the question is, like you said, if you struggle with this weight loss resistance, what else? Is it possibly that you are dealing with too much oxidative stress? Is it that your body is not detoxifying well? Now we can really start to look at, this is not a calorie in, calorie out issue for you. This is something else.
Right. Which helps because otherwise you're always fighting on the food front, on the calorie
Right.
front, when really you needed to detox and you need to detox
Exactly.
more often and seasonally. So I always
Right.
laugh because I teach it and sometimes I'm like, I know why I teach what I teach. I teach it because I need to hear it all the time.
Exactly. Right. It's just we have to reinforce it. But I think it's important for people to understand that, while we want that quick fix and we get these supposed answers from TikTok or Instagram, right? Like, here, do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, do that. At the end of the day, it's way more about, wait, what is going on inside your body? And we need to understand the nuances if we're really going to get you to the picture of health that you want, or that perfect weight that you really want. You're going to really, how do you really drop those last 10 pounds, right? How do you really put on muscle that you want to see? How do you really feel better from these symptoms that have been, bothering you, whether it's inflammation or fatigue or whatever it is, right? Bloating. So it's those kinds of things that we want to really be looking at. And, when I looked at your appetite and satiety, right, which is up here. So for you, it's not an appetite thing in terms of like that your body, the signals between your brain and your body are saying that you're not hungry. Those are working pretty well, right? Your signaling is working well genetically. But that's where lifestyle comes into play. Like you said, you have the tendency to want to go and indulge in something that tastes delicious.
For
Well,
sure.
that's a lifestyle thing, right? How do we behaviorally help you get around that? And that's where coaching and the support and really understanding how to nourish your body comes into play.
True. And it says here pro-inflammatory fat. Your fat cells may be prone to inflammation.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
have to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. Like it just makes so much sense why I teach what I teach, because
Yeah.
it's my obsession to always maintain. But
Yes.
here's the thing, it's like twofold. What you're saying is, if you don't pay attention to some of these things, because of the deficiencies you're running, what you may not realize is how those deficiencies play out in you. So, for
Yes.
example, my chronic D deficiency, I'm like, oh, well, I'm just chronically D deficient. In the health world, I know this is impacting my hormones and a lot of things. Didn't realize that the Achilles heel my body may have is my bones, but the
Right.
price I might pay for that is in my 60s. And the time to invest in bone health is now. And then simultaneously, you're saying there's so many things in the current world where I have a theory right now that in women's health, as we women hit each decade, the reason it's getting harder and harder is because of how we're walking into each decade. We're walking in
100%.
inflamed, we're walking in with oxidative stress, lack of detoxification. A lot of things are accumulating, and that's why it's harder. So
Mhm.
it's hard to guide a woman on what to do if you want a blanket approach, because if you don't have any data on them, you don't have enough data to understand, like, what are the issues. You're going at it from the outside in, versus a test like this shows you from the inside out. Hey, in Shivani's case, when she says in her 40s perimenopause is tough, why? Well, D, glutathione, there's certain things she's got very little support from the inside.
Right.
Whatever she's doing supplementation wise, she might not win. How do we support her from a completely different angle based on what we see here? And so
Yes.
that's what I find really cool, because otherwise, I think, a lot of women say, I just want an A on my report card. And I'm
Right.
one of those women. I'm like, I want an A on my blood test. I want it to show up that I'm like optimal. Why every time when I do big blood work am I like deficient, so deficient in all these areas? But you can see that there's certain genetic reasons, but now it's like you said, loaded gun. How do we approach it differently?
Right.
And you said through food. Here's my concern about food. A lot of times the food is lacking vitamins and minerals. Like, I've made it my agenda to source better. I went to Italy this summer and came back obsessed about food quality. And I've always been obsessed, but 10 times more obsessed. So I'm using like Florida Farm Direct, getting my eggs pasture raised, organic, trying to source better, still not knowing, does it carry the vitamin and mineral levels that I need for my body?
Right. And that's a great question. Look, we know our soil is pretty depleted no matter where you get your food from. I mean, look, the regenerative farming movement is certainly starting to take hold. We've been talking a lot about that. There's a lot of talk now, we're starting to see in the government, in the Senate, there was just a whole like roundtable discussion with people who have been in this conversation for a long time. So I think we're starting to see a tipping point in people really paying attention to, wait a minute, what are we doing to our farmland, and what is the quality of food, and is it affecting our health? And totally is, right? So to answer your question, no, we're not getting enough through food because of those reasons. But I think that if we can source better, like you say, try and use local organic farmers. Organic does matter, and for the people that poo-poo it, it matters, and there's a lot of research behind that. I mean, if there's no chemicals and there's no toxins and there's no pesticides and herbicides in your food, it matters to how your body responds to that. Okay.
Correct.
And food is grown in soil, so you want to make sure that that soil is organic. It's not, not been sprayed or whatever. And look, there's a lot of people doing small farming. There's, you can create a little garden in your home, or these, they have these hydroponic gardens that are healthy. I mean, some of them use chemicals. You got to be careful of that. But support local organic farmers is the best way. That's voting with your dollars, right? That's
True.
saying we want more of this. How do we get it? And that will help ensure a better nutrient, better nutrients in our food supply. But it's tough. We're really, it's a crisis in this country
I
of
think
being
so
able
too.
to eat healthy food in the way that we should be eating healthy, real food that's not processed. And so,
True.
again, the two, I very much like you. I'm very particular about where I get my produce. I really try um, to patronize, the local farmers and support them with my dollars, right?
Yeah. And so, looking at that test, is there anything else that stuck out at you that you want to share that if someone took this test with you, you would operationalize for them?
Well, I think it's really more about I'm always talking to my client about what is it that you're looking for,
Hmm.
right? It's not always necessarily, I mean, yes, I'll come up with anything that is high and very high impact. I'm
Sure.
going to shed a light on because those are the things that are, ultimately going to be the most meaningful right now for them to move the needle. But it's like you said, well, if there's some things that are mood and behavior wise that you're concerned about because you do have highs and lows, then we're going to address that and say, okay, well, this is how we look at that.
Yeah.
Same thing. I have clients who are on medications, who don't want to be on medications, right? Like, who wants to be on medicine for the rest of their lives? And they're told their cholesterol is through the roof and that it's genetic. Most
Sure.
of the time, I will tell you it's not genetic.
Hmm.
Most of the time, and if it is, it's a very, very small fraction of people that actually make too much cholesterol.
Hmm.
Most of the time, the genetics come from not being able to remove the cholesterol from your body. It's that whole detoxification thing. So they're
Sure.
not detoxing it. And so they can take all the statins they want and take all the medications they want to try and reduce the production of it,
Right.
but they're not getting rid of it. So
Hmm.
it's like recirculating old garbage, right? If you're going to recirculate the garbage and it's not going out of the system, guess what? It's going to start clogging your arteries. It's going to have an impact in your health. So I think it's really more important about what is it that you're wanting to know? What
Hmm.
is your health challenge that you want some resolution to?
Sure.
If you have symptoms that you're like, wait, what are these mysterious, like I said in the beginning, these mystery symptoms, and you're not sure why you have them, and you're just being put on a medication to manage it,
Sure.
not good enough. Not good enough, right? That's not a good enough reason. So really getting to the root for people and them feeling validated, like, oh, this is what that is. And here's how I now can approach it. Very different, right? And hugely impactful and life changing. Becomes
True.
life changing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have a lot of health struggles. They're on a lot of
Mhm. Oh,
medications,
yeah. More and more
and
now, we're seeing it, not to interrupt you, but oh
yeah,
my God, our health crisis is huge.
it is. And people are taking so many medications, so many
Mhm.
drugs. Those are interacting with each other. I just saw a statistic that the interaction of drugs is one of the biggest killers in the US because everyone's
Yeah.
on too many medications. And I thought that's just crazy. Like in my world, we have so many different herbs and spices that can do so much. They're powerful powerhouses for inflammation, for antioxidation, all these things that I obsess over. And so it's just interesting to me, like when you ask what's your health goal, for me, I find myself the majority of the year and the majority of the time, I'm at 90% healthy. I feel
Yeah.
good. I feel healthy. I feel vibrant. I design my whole life around my health. That's something I do in anyway. But there's always this 10% where I'm like, well, I could be more optimal. I could be stronger. I could, of course, be fitter. You enter your 40s as a woman. I do think my brain function could be way more on point. I'm sure it's like 90%, but I want that last 10% of awesome. And then also, after seeing my family history and how horrible it was growing up, all the diabetes, heart attack, stroke, Parkinson's, everything, I just want to know that my last quarter, I've done the work now. So the last quarter isn't horrific and spent in doctor's offices like I've seen my family go through. That doesn't feel like a good investment of my lifespan if the last quarter is spent that way.
Right.
And so that's why I really think of understanding these tests as being important, which is what in the here and now am I not understanding that I should do better? Why are certain deficiencies always running, which means I'm not getting the A plus plus on the report card? And
Mhm.
then what is that future prevention plan that maybe bone health will come out of nowhere and I won't have known something that I should have known, could have
Right.
known earlier? So when you sit down with a client, I just think that it's so interesting if you are able, which you just showed us, to look at, oh, okay, it's her glutathione. Like that was not data I was told based on this test. Um, that's really specific, but it's also really specific enough that you can address it head on, which I
Right.
find really cool. Then
Yes.
you know the next step. And
Yeah.
so will
100%.
you share a few stories of like a patient or two where you've sat with them and making these changes, like you said, top down, addressed the main issues and thus cascaded down into solving all the rest of the issues?
Yeah, I mean, oh gosh, we have so many. I have so recently. I have a gentleman. He's actually in his 70s, whose family has a very, very, very strong history of Alzheimer's. So, we did his genetic, and the reason I'm saying this for a reason, and this can apply to men or women, right?
Mhm.
But a lot of people, our medical system, I mean, I don't think they have solutions for a lot of things, but the least of which is brain health, right? You had talked about your memory, and we could look at memory and cognition in the DNA as well, right? That's one of the things that we can look at. So we're never going to predict or diagnose Alzheimer's, right? It's not something that we can say you're going to get Alzheimer's, right? Or you're going to have Parkinson's, or you're going to have, maybe you're predisposed to cognitive decline, right? Based on oxidative stress, based on detoxification, based on some of these other things that we can see. And so he came in with a history of Alzheimer's in the family. He's 70. He's like, I don't want to suffer this. And so we did his DNA, and lo and behold, in his memory and brain health, there were significant genes that impacted his what his future might look like.
Wow.
So for me, the first thing is you're empowering people with information that they can use to prevent this horribly tragic disease.
Correct.
Right. So for him, he's like, okay, it was a little like unnerving maybe to look and say, well, maybe that might be in my future, but you already know it might be in your future because you've got family members who are suffering from it.
Right.
So what good is it going to do you to stick your head in the sand and go, I don't want to know, I don't want to know, I don't know. And then you get to the point where you're there, and really, who does it hurt the most? Your family. And
Correct.
I'm dealing with that now with my dad, and it hurts the family the most, more than the person suffering.
Sure.
Right, I think, because by the time you're suffering, you don't always know.
Yeah.
So he did the testing. We did all the other testing and corrected his deficiencies and so forth. And he's working. He was doing brain skills and stuff. And so I want to say it's probably been about 2 years now that he can say he's noticed a huge difference in his brain function. Like he's not forgetting like he was. His
Mm.
memory is better than it was, right? So that he is on a good, and his levels have all come up, right? So his trajectory to move forward is like, if his predisposition was here, you're going down this path of cognitive decline. Now we just completely diverted that path,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we have women. So I have women who come to me who are worried about things like cancer, right?
Mm.
Again, we're not going to diagnose and say you're going to be likely to get breast cancer or you're going to get this kind of hormonal cancer. But we can look at things like detoxification. Hormones is in this test, right?
Yeah.
So when we see that your body is not detoxifying those hormones, why do we get cancer? Most it's aberrant cells that have gone awry from oxidative stress, from
Correct.
not being detoxified, from your estrogens not being broken down properly. If we can see that and we can mitigate that, right? I had a woman come in, she was diagnosed with breast cancer in her 50s, healthy, right? Always thought she was healthy. That's what people come in. I thought I was healthy. I got diagnosed with cancer. And when we looked at her genetics, we saw detoxification issues with hormones. We saw certain things. We were actually able to help her not even have to be on those aromatase inhibitors because we saw her predisposition to that, and we were able to treat it naturally.
Wow.
Right. So we did some work with her because she did have to have some preventative chemo.
Sure.
But then while she was even going through the chemo, how did we support her nutrition health
Sure.
so that she felt well going through chemo? Right. So
Wow.
like I can give you a bazillion different scenarios because everybody's story is so different. But it
Sure.
is life changing when you give people, look, I did my DNA. I am dealing with a dad who is suffering from horrible vascular dementia and some other things now when it comes to brain health. And I looked at my DNA and I'm like, ooh, yeah, mine is not so good in that area, right? And when my daughter looked at me and said, Mom, if you get like that, I'm like, no, 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 no. Let's stop right there.
Yeah.
I know enough to prevent myself from ever getting to where, God willing, right? Of course, to where he is, because I know what I know now.
Sure. And you can apply it now.
And I can apply it now. I did that with my son. You know, my dad's side of the family has cardiovascular issues. I wanted to get my son tested because every single male on his side of the family has had a cardiovascular event, a heart attack, stroke, something. My son's DNA is not so great. It's very much like that of my dad's. I'm like, look, I'm sorry, that's your DNA. You know, that's what you were dealt. But the fact is we know this and we can do something about it now in your 20s before you end up with a, God forbid, a heart attack or something like that. Right.
Right.
So I think the utility of this is so far reaching. You can tell I get excited about it because
Yeah.
we're helping people. We're
Ab-
helping people with real life situations in preventing illness from happening. And to me, that's like, you know, that is the most gratifying, rewarding thing that I could ever do.
Absolutely. And I'm so fascinated now. Like I can't wait to book a session with you and go deeper and fully understand how to apply this so that I can prevent a lot of the issues that I know happen in my family.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting when you can customize to yourself and then you're not always battling. Like I said, D and these things. I hate that I'm always D deficient. And it's like, how do you just apply this and then you are supporting multiple systems of health
Yep.
at once?
Yep.
So I'm definitely going to be booking with you. I know you have to get going soon. I've kept you for long enough. Meryl, will you share where people can find you and get in touch with you and your podcast as well?
Sure, sure. So my podcast is the Rebel Nutritionist podcast. So you can find us on all platforms. We're everywhere. You can find us at merylbrandwine.com. I am on Instagram as rebel.nutritionist. Our phone number, you can call us 954-727-9006. I will always do a complimentary 15-minute conversation with whoever wants to come chat with us. And yeah.
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today, for opening up my DNA test and sharing it with the world, and kind of highlighting what it is we can understand from testing at this level. For me, I love exploring different ways that we can approach our health. And when I met you, I was like, wow, this woman knows her stuff. I'm excited to work with someone who can get that deep into our health and support us at such a one customized level the way you have. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I always love chatting with you. It's a great conversation. And I think just such important information to be sharing out there.
For sure. Thank you.